Number 2. Marvin Heemeyer's Revenge. Granby, Colorado, is a small town with under 2,000 inhabitants. It is a quiet, peaceful place. In the early 1990s, Marvin Heemeyer, a welder by trade, moved to the nearby town of Grand Lake and established a muffler shop in Granby. Heemeyer was well liked by most of his friends, neighbors, and customers. Many described him as the type of person who would do anything for a friend. However, he was also a man with strong opinions and a volatile temper. Heemeyer was a proponent of legalized gambling and published 2 newsletters promoting his views on the subject. When he was interviewed by a local reporter for an editorial opposing gambling, the reporter claimed that Heemeyer became so angry that the interview nearly ended in a fistfight. In another incident, a customer of his business reported that Heemeyer had threatened to kill her husband after she refused to pay for a faulty muffler repair. One of Heemeyer's friends summed up his personality thusly: if he was your friend, then he was your best friend. If he was your enemy, then he was your worst and most dangerous enemy. In the late 1990s, Colorado businessman Cody Docheff approached Heemeyer about buying his business in order to build a concrete batch plant. According to Docheff, they had initially agreed on a price of $250,000, but that the deal fell through when Heemeyer attempted to raise the price to $375,000. Docheff then decided to take the matter to the Granby City Council and requested that the land surrounding Heemeyer's shop be rezoned. In 2001, the Town Zoning Commission and trustees approved the rezoning request and granted the Docheffs the right to build their plant, Mountain View Concrete, on an adjacent piece of property to Heemeyer's shop. The approved plan would cut off customer access to Heemeyer's business. At this time, the city also fined Heemeyer $2,500 for having several junked cars on his property and for failing to have his shop hooked up to a sewer line. Heemeyer attempted to fight the decision. He appealed the committee's rezoning approval and gathered signatures from townspeople who were opposed to the plant. He attempted to gain permission to install a sewer line, which would have run under 8 feet of property owned by Mountain View Concrete, but the owners refused. He purchased a bulldozer in order to build a new road to allow customer access to his shop, but the city council did not approve this plan. By this time, Heemeyer, along with many other people in Granby, believed that there were some less than legal deals being made between the city council and Mountain View Concrete, although no actual evidence of wrongdoing has ever been found. Having run out of options, Heemeyer sent the city a check for $2,500 to cover his fines and wrote the word cowards in the memo line. He then sold his business to a trash disposal company and was given 6 months to vacate. By the time he had paid his fines, Heemeyer had already began to make preparations for his revenge. He began to make modifications to the bulldozer he had purchased. He created a powerful armored shell consisting of concrete layered between thick sheets of steel, which covered the cab, the engine, and part of the treads. In the armor, he left several small holes for front and rear cameras, protected by several inches of bulletproof glass, which fed to monitors in the cab. He created several gun ports in the armor surrounding the cab as well, and even installed blowers capable of firing bursts of compressed air next to each camera in order to blow away dust and debris. Heemeyer documented the construction with handwritten notes and audio tapes. "Because of your anger, because of your malice, because of your hate, you would not work with me," he stated in one of his taped recordings. "I am going to sacrifice my life, my miserable future that you gave me, in order to show you that what you did is wrong." In another note, he wrote, "I was always willing to be reasonable until I had to be unreasonable. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things." Heemeyer worked on his vehicle in plain sight at his muffler shop, and it was seen several times by the few remaining customers he had. Strangely, no one questioned him about it. In his notes, Heemeyer credited a higher power with clouding their vision. On the morning of June 4th, 2004, Heemeyer mailed his audio recordings to his brother and went to his shop. He loaded the cab of his modified bulldozer with guns, food, water, and a handwritten list of targets. He then used the winch controls to lower the armored shell onto the vehicle, sealing himself inside with 30 tons of concrete and steel. Just after 3 p.m., Heemeyer smashed through the side of his business and drove towards his first target, Mountain View Concrete. He smashed through the side of the main building and began to destroy it. Cody Dochev, who was at the plant that day, attempted to block Heemeyer with a front-end loader, but withdrew as Heemeyer fired at him from his bulldozer's gun ports. Within a few minutes, Heemeyer had eviscerated 2 buildings and destroyed several vehicles. He then made his way to the highway and slowly drove towards the heart of downtown Granby, followed by a parade of emergency vehicles. Police fired multiple rounds at Heemeyer, but his bulldozer was completely impervious to small arms. One officer, Glenn Traynor, managed to climb on top of the bulldozer and fired 37 rounds in an attempt to shoot his way in. "I think the thing that drove me," he later reported, "is that I knew that killing him behind the wheel was the only way we were going to be able to stop this thing." Heemeyer arrived in town and began to seek out and destroy his other targets, which included the home of the former mayor, the office of a newspaper that had sided against him in an editorial, the business of a former city councilman, and the city hall. Police attempted to stay one step ahead of him and evacuate people from the bulldozer's path, and utilized the reverse 911 system to call people in the path of his rampage to warn them. By this time, realizing that the bulldozer was not affected by gunfire, police attempted several other methods to disable it, including dropping a flashbang grenade into the bulldozer's exhaust port, which had no apparent effect. They requisitioned an industrial scraper to try and overpower the bulldozer, but Heemeyer's heavily modified vehicle simply shoved it aside. Colorado Governor Bill Owens considered authorizing the National Guard to utilize either an Apache attack helicopter equipped with a Hellfire missile or a 2-man team equipped with a Javelin anti-tank missile to destroy the bulldozer, but decided against it due to the potential for collateral damage from a missile strike in a populated area. An hour into his rampage, Heemeyer had successfully destroyed 13 targeted buildings and headed for his 14th, a hardware store whose owner had sided against him in his zoning dispute. By this time, the effects of the gunfire and the additional weight of the armor was beginning to have an effect on the vehicle. The radiator was leaking, and the bulldozer was losing horsepower. As it broke through the wall of the hardware store, the floor collapsed underneath it, partially dropping the vehicle into the building's shallow basement. A SWAT team surrounded the bulldozer as Heemeyer attempted to reverse out of the hole, but the vehicle had lost too much power and was stuck. An officer reported hearing a single gunshot from inside the bulldozer's cab, and suddenly the vehicle stopped moving. Heemeyer had committed suicide and the rampage was over. It took 12 hours with a cutting torch to crack the bulldozer's armored cab to remove Heemeyer's body. In the course of his 2-hour rampage, Heemeyer had damaged or destroyed 14 buildings and caused millions of dollars in damages. No one besides Heemeyer was killed in the attack. In the years since the incident, there have been conflicting views regarding Heemeyer and his rampage. Some view him as a folk hero, rallying against a corrupt local government, and claim that Heemeyer went out of his way not to hurt anyone. Others dispute this view, stating that the fact that no one was killed is due more to luck and police action than Heemeyer himself. Some of Heemeyer's actions can be viewed ambiguously. For example, when he fired on Cody Dochev, Was the fact that Dotchev was not hit with gunfire due to luck, or was Heemeyer purposely missing his shots and simply trying to scare Dotchev off? Other actions are somewhat less ambiguous. At one point during his rampage, Heemeyer allegedly attempted to knock a wall down onto 2 police officers, and at another point, he fired several shots at a large propane tank. The tank didn't explode, but if it had, everyone within a 1-mile radius would have been endangered. Heemeyer's bulldozer, which was quickly dubbed the Killdozer by the media, was cut into small pieces and distributed among several different scrapyards to prevent souvenir taking. Some citizens of Granby proposed a yearly celebration of the incident to generate tourism, but the town council rejected this idea. In 2014, a Russian film inspired by the incident was released. The film, titled Leviathan, won the award for Best Screenplay at the 2014 Cannes Film Festival and was judged the best film of the year at the 2014 BFI London Film Festival and the 45th International Film Festival of India. In the end, the decision whether to view Heemeyer as a hero or a villain, or perhaps most accurately as something in between, is best left to the individual. Number 1. Andrzej Bamberski's Revenge. Andrzej Bamberski is an ethnically Polish man born in France in 1938. As a small child, he lived with his grandparents in Poland, where he survived the Nazi invasion and occupation of Poland, was taken from his grandparents, and eventually reunited by the International Red Cross with his parents in France in 1945. In the 1960s, he married a French woman, Danielle Gonin, and had 2 children, a daughter, Kalinka, and a son, Nicholas. By the 1970s, the family were living in Casablanca, Morocco, where Bamberski worked as a chartered accountant. They lived in an area of Casablanca where many foreign expats resided, and one of their neighbors was Dieter Krombach, a German doctor born in Dresden in 1935. As a child, he had survived the Allied firebombing of Dresden, which killed at least 30,000 people. Krombach lived with his second wife and children and worked as a physician for the German consulate. The 2 families became friends. Eventually, Krombach began having an affair with Gonin. Both families left Morocco and moved to France, where they lived in neighboring towns, and the affair continued. Eventually, they made their infidelity public, divorced their respective spouses, and married each other. Krombach moved with Gonin to Germany, while Bamberski remained in France. In 1982, Bamberski's children, 14-year-old Kalinka and 11-year-old Nicholas, were living in Lindau, Germany, with their mother and stepfather. Kalinka, who barely spoke German, lived for most of the time at a French-speaking boarding school, coming home only on weekends and for the summer. In August of 1982, she was planning to move back in with her father in France. On July 9th, Kalinka, who was by all accounts a healthy, athletic young woman, spent the day windsurfing, returning home at around 5 p.m. According to her mother and stepfather, she complained of feeling unwell. She ate dinner with them at 7:30 and went to bed shortly afterwards. She woke up around 10 p.m., then read in her downstairs bedroom until midnight, when her stepfather asked her to turn out the light. The following morning, Krombach attempted to wake his stepdaughter and discovered she was dead. He attempted to revive her with several different stimulant injections, but after this proved unsuccessful, authorities were called. An autopsy was performed 2 days later, carried out by a local physician, and attended by the police superintendent, the local prosecutor, and in an unusual break of protocol, Krombach. Findings during the autopsy included aspirated stomach contents in the airway and lungs, undigested contents in the stomach, several injection marks, bloodstains around the genitals, and a whitish substance in the vagina, which was not tested. During the autopsy, her genitals were removed, and they went missing shortly afterwards and have never been found. No official cause of death was given. Krombach, when questioned, admitted to injecting Kalinka with a cobalt iron mixture on the night of her death. He at first claimed he had given her the injection to aid with suntanning, but later changed his story and said he had given it to her because she had felt unwell. Cobalt iron mixtures are sometimes given to people suffering from anemia. However, there is the potential for a severe allergic reaction to the mixture, and it should also be noted that a large enough injection of the mixture can cause unconsciousness. The local prosecutor in Lindau declined to open a case, but after Bamberski received a copy of the autopsy report, he pressed for further investigation. He believed that Krombach had raped Kalinka and then killed her with the injection to silence her, or that Krombach had knocked her unconscious with the injection to rape her, and that she had then inadvertently died. He consulted with 2 forensic doctors in France, who told him that his theories were plausible, and noted that it was extremely unusual that the substance found in her vagina was not tested. Under pressure from Bamberski's lawyers, additional investigations were ordered, and an expert who reviewed the evidence stated that Krombach's timeline of the night of Kalinka's death was not convincing. The expert stated that had Kalinka suffered an adverse reaction to the cobalt iron mixture, it would have occurred shortly after injection, not hours later. The undigested stomach contents pointed to her having been injected shortly after dinner, and the stomach contents found in the lungs pointed to death occurring while Kalinka was unconscious. Another expert, a professor of pharmacology, was quoted in a court document concluding that the intravenous injection of iron cobalt had probably led to the death of Kalinka Bamberski. This was still not enough evidence for German prosecutors, and they declined to press charges. Bamberski, however, was not ready to give up. In 1983, during Oktoberfest, he traveled to Lindau and walked around the town distributing flyers accusing Krombach of raping and murdering his daughter. He was arrested and charged with disturbing the peace and defamation and ordered to pay 500,000 German marks to Krombach, which he refused to do, and thus was told that if he set foot on German soil again, he would be arrested. Still unwilling to give up, Bamberski instead began pressuring French authorities to charge Krombach, which was possible as Kalinka was a French citizen. In 1985, her body, which was interred in France, was exhumed to test for additional evidence, at which point the missing genitals were discovered. Regardless, a long decade later, in 1995, Krombach was tried in France in absentia and received a sentence of 15 years in prison for intentionally afflicting of bodily harm, which caused unintentional death. However, this victory was purely symbolic, as Germany refused to extradite Krombach, and as long as he never left Germany, he would remain a free man. In 1997, Krombach's luck began to change, as he was accused and convicted of drugging and raping a 16-year-old patient in his office. He was given a 2-year sentence and lost his medical license. During his trial for rape, a disturbing detail about his past emerged: that he had been investigated, but never charged, for the death of his first wife in the 1970s, who had died under suspicious circumstances at the age of 24. He was released from prison in 1999 and found himself ostracized by many of his friends, who had initially supported him during his legal battles with Bamberski. Over the next 10 years, Bamberski continued to pressure French authorities to fight to have Krombach extradited. He was particularly upset when, in 2001, the European Court of Human Rights annulled Krombach's 1995 French conviction because he had been unable to defend himself, and awarded him 100,000 French francs in compensation. In 2006, Krombach made headlines again when he was sentenced to 28 months imprisonment for practicing medicine without a license. In 2009, Bamberski was becoming increasingly frantic as the statute of limitations against Krombach would run out in 2012. He traveled to Austria, where he met with a private detective to discuss the possibility of kidnapping Krombach and transporting him to France. The detective declined to get involved. While in Austria to meet with the detective, Bamberski stayed in a hotel and spoke openly to waiters in restaurants, the hotel staff, and others about his plight. One night, his hotel phone rang. Bamberski answered, and a man who identified himself only as Anton told Bamberski that he would like to speak to him about Kalinka. The next day he met with Anton, an immigrant from Kosovo in his 30s, in a local park. Anton told him that he would kidnap Krombach and transport him to France for a fee of 20,000 euros. He said that he was moved by Bamberski's plight and that the money was to cover expenses, and that his willingness to help Bamberski was for humanitarian reasons. Bamberski and Anton drove into Germany together, and Bamberski pointed out Krombach's apartment to Anton. Anton instructed him to return to France and await a phone call. 1 week later, Bamberski was phoned at 10 p.m. by a woman who spoke French with a heavy German accent. "Be prepared to go to Mulhouse," she said, referring to a large town in France just across the German border. 5 hours later, the same woman called back. "Krombach is in Mulhouse," she said. "He is at Rue de Tilleul, across from customs. Warn the police." Bamberski called and spoke to a police officer in Mulhouse. "I am Bamberski," he said. "I had a daughter, Kalinka, who was raped and murdered by Krombach, and there is an international warrant out for his arrest. Please go find him on the Rue de Tilleul." The policeman replied that a woman with a German accent had called him a few minutes earlier and given him the same information. Police responded to the scene and found Krombach badly beaten and chained to a fence. He was immediately taken into custody, as was Bamberski. German authorities demanded Krombach's release and return to Germany, but French authorities refused, and in 2011, Krombach finally went to trial for the murder of Kalinka, 29 years after it had occurred, and only 1 year before the statute of limitations would have expired. Krombach's lawyers argued that the trial was illegitimate, since German prosecutors had already dismissed the case, and because Krombach had been brought to France by an illegal abduction. However, the court ruled that Krombach had never been properly tried in Germany, and that the action of an individual could not impede the act of a state. During his trial, the court heard testimony from a German woman who had an affair with Krombach as a teenager, who stated that he would drug his wife with sedatives so that they could have sex while she was at home. 2 German women also testified that Krombach had drugged them with iron cobalt injections and raped them when they were teenagers. Concluding that Krombach had drugged Kalinka with the intention of raping her, Krombach was sentenced to 15 years in prison for causing intentional bodily harm, resulting in unintentional death. This verdict was upheld on appeal in 2012. Krombach appealed again, this time to the European Court of Human Rights, which rejected the appeal in March of 2018, exhausting the last of his options. Anton, whose full name was Anton Kresnicki, and an accomplice, a Georgian immigrant named Katja Bablovani, each received 1-year sentences for kidnapping. Bamberski and Anton became friends, and in 2015, when Anton applied for refugee status in France, Bamberski paid for his lawyer. Bamberski, who had finally succeeded in obtaining justice for his daughter by any means necessary, was also charged with kidnapping. He was found guilty and was sentenced to 1 year's probation. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please like, check out my other videos, and subscribe.